Recently, Major League Soccer was ranked the ninth best league in the world, according to Opta, closely ahead of the Championship, the Argentine League, the Eredivisie, and Liga MX. Now, this has been a hotly debated topic because a lot of people don't think MLS has quite reached the top 10 status yet in the world. However, with all the talent the league has brought in over the last couple seasons, it's a discussion worth having. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to MLS Moves. Please make sure you like this video down below. Let's get to 200 likes on this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and hit that little bell notification so you never miss a video. So I couldn't think of a better opportunity to bring on two of my good friends, Alexi Lalas of the State of the Union podcast and Filippo Silva of Tactical Manager TV to debate whether MLS is truly a top 10 league in the world. Now, on to the video. Well, I have two special guests today, two of my friends, and maybe by the end of this, they both will be friends as well. We'll see if it goes well. But I have today Filippo Silva of Tactical Manager TV, and I have the usmnt legend, Alexi Lalas. We'll start off with Filippo. How are you doing today, my friend?
Man, you called him a legend, and that's the introduction I get?
You're close. You're close. You're building towards it. He's got more miles on
You
himself
see
than
how
you.
that you see how that starts, Alexi? He goes right away. Filippo's my friend, but this guy right here, he's a USMNT legend, right?
Yeah, but then he went, I got more miles, which is basically saying I'm old. So wonderful start there, my friend.
I have to keep it even. I have to keep it even. But hey, listen, we have a topic today that gets a lot of people up in arms, especially the USMNT fan base and a lot of American soccer fans. And that's if MLS is a top 10 league in the world. Now, I know, Alexi, you'll talk more about if you think it is. You're more in the favor of it being a top 10 league, and Filippo, you're obviously on the opposite side. So we'll start off with Alexi. Let me ask you this. Is MLS a top 10 league in the world?
Yes, I do think that MLS is a top 10 league in the world. And obviously, the criteria that you use to judge it is going to affect your opinion. I'm sure Filippo has a different criteria or the same and then coming to a different conclusion, maybe, or maybe we agree. By the way, you started off saying that we may be friends. I think we're already friends. I met him a bunch of years ago. I've followed everything that he has done. I have a lot of respect and appreciation.
You met in Charlotte. In Charlotte.
That's right. There we go. Exactly. In Charlotte. So it was, it was fun to very briefly, but I've watched him from afar. And like most people out there, I love the interesting and entertaining and provocative way in which he looks at things. When it comes to MLS, obviously going into its 30th year, this is the most successful professional league in North American soccer history in terms of the speed in which it has grown, the impact that I would, that I would champion and talk about both on and off the field. The money aspect of it in terms of the business, and I also think in terms of the influence. And then finally, I would say in the impact that it has made on the growth of soccer, whether it's in development, whether it's in the infrastructure, the list goes on and on and on. And when you put it up and match it with other leagues around the world, sometimes we talk about the rest of the world. And really what we're talking about is the 3-4 major leagues out there as opposed to all of the other leagues. And just because a league is in Europe doesn't necessarily make it great.
Filippo, he laid out a pretty good argument or talking about the longevity, the success, something we have never seen in this country with the soccer league, even going back to NASL days, having Pele and a couple other superstars, even that league folded. What's your response to Alexi about MLS being a top 10 league in the world?
Yeah, that league folding, there's other aspects to it. And soccer in general is bigger in this country due to multiple factors. One of them, MLS, World Cups, I would say like even immigration. A lot of Latinos came into the country. FIFA, the video game, speed. There's like a bunch of reasons why soccer is bigger, which can lead to like giving MLS more stability. USL too, like USL surviving, right? That's another one, much smaller than MLS, but surviving. Yeah, again, when you go to the top 10 discussion, it's more or less what Alexi said in the beginning. It depends on the criteria. If you go based on like league attendance, MLS is top 5 right now, right, in the world, something like that. On average attendance, they're top 5. If you go on just quality, it can be subjective or it may not be subjective, right? If we go based on MLS's matchups with Liga MX, and I'm going to use the CONCACAF Champions Cup more specifically because the Leagues Cup is still just played in the US. If they change that and they mix it up, I think it's a bit more fair of evaluation, but it's mainly played in the US. And CONCACAF Champions Cup, we have multiple editions, right? Not 2 or 3 or 4. We have like at least 40, 30 of them. Well, actually, MLS didn't start playing till 96, so 30 of them roughly. And MLS even won a few in the beginning, right? I think DC United
I think 3
won.
total. Yeah, 3 total.
Yeah, DC United, the Galaxy won.
Galaxy and Sounders.
He knows. There it is.
Yeah, right.
Who's got 2 thumbs and is a winner of that a long time ago? This guy.
and then the Sounders won it 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 2022,
yeah.
I think. Yeah. But overall, the record in knockout rounds against Mexico is still quite negative. It's quite negative. And obviously, people can go and argue, hey, the top teams in Mexico are better than the top teams in MLS. But when you check the bottom, we are better, which might be true, with MLS when it comes to many leagues. When it comes to the Dutch league, PSV, Ajax, and Utrecht might dominate MLS, but MLS is better than all the teams below it. So that's when we talk about criteria, because if you're going to go towards like, oh, MLS has parity, I like to say this about MLS. Let's get out of the top 10 discussion for a second. Let's put it like, this. One thing that we can easily agree upon. MLS is definitely a top 20 league in the world. That's not even debatable. So let's just put it that for now. That's very easy, very straightforward. Out of the top 20 leagues in the world, it probably has the most parity. I think that's also fair to say. MLS
by design, right?
By design, of course. Yeah. If they let it loose, it probably would lose that parity for sure, especially in the big cities, would probably dominate. MLS has also the most unbalanced rosters out of these top 20 leagues, in my opinion. You'll have like a player like Messi in the roster, and you'll have a guy that got out of NCAA D1 sometimes. Obviously, I'm exaggerating it to make a point a little bit, but my overall point is you have a world-class player like Messi, and you have a few others, the DPs, and then you have players that they would be playing second or third divisions in other countries, more deeper into the roster. While other teams in general, I would say like top 10, top 12 leagues, it's a bit more balanced. So there's more competition for each spot. And we hear this a lot from players that go to Europe or even Latin America, whatever, about how each day in practice, it's different when compared to MLS. Like, let's be real. Most DPs don't lose a spot, even if they're underperforming. We've seen this with some that flopped, like Shaqiri at times, like Insigne. A lot of these guys would have, in Europe, it's like, okay, you're out, like, dude. But they're locked in such a big salary, and they're more seen sometimes even as a marketing piece. And I think these aspects of MLS do downgrade it a bit in the perspective of being a top 10 league. The results against Liga MX, we can all agree it's behind the top 5 leagues that we can mention, the big 5 in Europe. I do firmly believe it's behind Brazil, and your co-host, Alexi, would probably agree with that. I think you would agree with that too. So that's already 6 leagues. I do think it's behind Liga MX for now, at least, based on the results. Obviously, if you go to different criteria, that's already 7 leagues. And then we start to enter some leagues I wrote down here, the Eredivisie, the EFL Championship, which is very ugly to watch, but it's a very tough league. Argentina, that one's debatable. That's one that MLS, especially because of the money that MLS has. Now, if you go like to infrastructure, for example, MLS might be a top 5 league in the world, because you talk to people from Europe, and I've talked to many of them. They come here, and that's a lot to do with the United States, because they come here and they see like U.S. colleges, the sports, and they are like, what the hell is this, man? This is better than Ajax. Look at the infrastructure that these are D1 colleges, and MLS included. The infrastructure for most MLS teams is quite incredible. And so, in my opinion, in terms of just pure quality, I don't think it's a top 10 league. It's not that far. I put it usually, and Will knows this, I put it between 10 to 15. So it's not something that I really argue with.
It's close then. It's close. I think we can agree that while we can disagree, I think it's top 10, but you're not saying it's 25 or anything like that. You're saying it's certainly, and to your point, I mean, look, the way we started this off was this is a subjective type of assessment, right? I can't tell you, for example, the best league in the world is the one you love, right? I can't tell you what the best wine is any more than I can tell you what the best food is or the best looking person is. It's subjective. It's what moves you. However, when you get into the structure of Major League Soccer, and I think you hit on it there, it is a little apples to oranges when we're doing this thing because of the manufactured parity that we have there. And the reality of, you talked about the elites, we talk about the super clubs and the haves and the have-nots, and this disparity that exists in most leagues around the world. And MLS has guarded against that with the system. For example, when Harry Kane gets on the field for Bayern Munich, right? He knows that, I don't know, 70, 80% of the time, they've already won the game because they've amassed the talent, and it's just so much better than everybody else that he is playing. And that's just the way that the league is structured. That's not the case. Now, there is some separation when it comes to Major League Soccer, but the parity that you talk about makes it very, very difficult to compare and contrast with other leagues because they don't have that type of system in place. And yet, despite playing with I guess it would be one foot if we're talking about soccer, behind their back, MLS has constantly competed both on and certainly off the field. And I know you mentioned that, which is why I give it the benefit of the doubt much more so than other leagues with a more, I guess you would say, traditional type of structure out there.
How much do you think also with MLS? Because, for example, in MLS, if you're in last place, they don't really tank like the NBA, for example, to get the #1 draft pick because it's not that important.
Right.
But obviously, even as a professional player, you can get a bit complacent. You're like, I can't make the playoffs anymore. I wouldn't say you give the game away, but you're not going to maybe risk an injury. You're going to go a bit easier than normal. I think that's pretty normal. While in leagues that have an open structure, which, by the way, Argentina these days, they don't have promotion relegation, just to make that clear, but other leagues do. And there's a lot of pressure to not get relegated because there are salary cuts. People lose their jobs, and there's pressure from the fan base. And depending on how big the club is, even from the media, how much does that hurt MLS? Because one of the big issues I have with MLS is the regular season. I think there's very often moments in the regular season that some games look like glorified friendlies. Not all. A few of them, whether it is a team that already qualified to the playoffs and can't win the Supporter Shield, so it doesn't matter too much unless they want home field advantage, which in MLS it plays a big role, especially because of the travel. But there are teams in the bottom that it reaches a point where they don't give a crap. While in Europe, for you to get to that point, not even Europe, just like any league of promotion relegation, we might have that in the US very soon with USL maybe. Unless you're already relegated, there's always something to battle for. There's always the intensity there. And I'm talking about this because I've talked to players that play there. One example, like Gianluca Busio, Tenor Tessman, they talked about the time in Venezia where they were at the bottom of the table, and every game, it's like the pressure because you're trying to escape relegation. You don't think that affects the league in one way, shape, or form in terms of the top 10 status of just the pressure and scrutiny to get it done?
Yeah, I think it affects the league. I think it affects the perception of whether it's you or others out there, especially because we live in this global world. The unique part about soccer, and I love it, is that obviously it's not uniquely American. We have our own version of it, both on and off the field, and how we go about it. But we are citizens of the world and the world's game, and I love that. It also means that there's this inevitable compare and contrast with what goes on around the world. I do push back when it comes to the belief that there are no repercussions, that there are no consequences to playing badly, to losing. All right. People still lose their jobs, whether it's on the field in terms of players, whether it's off the field in terms of coaches or front office staffs, when things don't go well. You just don't have that ultimate, guillotine type of moment of going down into the lower level. And I want to be very, very clear. I've said this many, many times. I have no problem with promotion relegation. All right. There's nothing stopping promotion relegation from happening. I've lived it. I know the power of it. I understand what it feels like to be in it. I understand what you're talking about when it comes to the pressure that players feel. I don't have to have it to enjoy my soccer. And I also don't believe that when it comes to Major League Soccer or any other league, you mentioned Argentina, anybody else that doesn't have it, that doesn't necessarily mean that players aren't feeling the pressure and don't see consequences from not playing well and not winning.
I think it's just smaller, the pressure. And two things. It's not just promotion relegation. It's also a little bit of our soccer culture. It's not the same as the fans are not going to be as wild as maybe like Argentina or Brazil. That's just we have a different soccer culture.
So
which is fine.
how does that manifest? How are Brazilian fans? How Brazilian or Argentina fans wild? I push back on this too. It might be a different type of fandom
Well,
in
I
terms of
can
the
tell
way that
you
they look at themselves, but
the
how does that manifest?
the way I'll say it manifests is I get called toxic very often by not you specifically, but a lot of the U.S. soccer media members, and they block me for opinions that, I mean, you follow me, you know it. I may over exaggerate or be provocative at times, but I don't think I ever cross a line in terms of how far you can go. And in U.S. soccer, it's seen perceived as toxic. While you see fans demonstrate their passion for a national team or for a club, um, at those levels. I'm not talking about the over exaggerated ones where it gets violent, which those we don't
Right,
want
sure,
here.
sure.
We don't want those here. I'm talking about the loud ones, and at times even a bit obnoxious, where the culture differs from the U.S. for sure. Not as a whole. We have fans of all kinds, but it's just a bit different. Like for example, um, I'm trying to give an example. I saw in MLS, for example, MLS Cup, and I've seen this many times. I can't point to a specific post because I don't save these, but you probably seen this too, Alexi, and you've seen too, Will, where a team loses. I saw last year a fan from the New York Red Bulls when they lost MLS Cup making a post that we lost, but I'm just happy that I made new friends here and that we won and that we made it to the final. I get it. And you should be proud of your team for making it to the final. That's no easy accomplishment, especially because I don't think we expected New York Red Bulls to make it to the final last year. But I'll put it this way. If the United States makes it to the World Cup final in 2026, I'll be extremely proud of this team. I will be amazed. But if we lose, I will not be happy. I'll be devastated. I can't celebrate that loss. Because if you made it to the final, you've reached the point where you can win it. It's just a different culture and level of passion. And then certain fans, when they show that, they were called toxic by multiple media members, for example, with articles written about it. And even Greg Berhalter mentioning it the other day in the Chicago Fire. It's a bit different. I have no issue with people speaking their minds and even the media calling us whatever they want, but it's perceived different in different countries. And in the US, that's a bit different. And again, there's no issue with that. Our soccer culture is different.
But
Well,
do you understand the irony of what you're saying? You're arguing that a different culture is, and I know I'm paraphrasing here, is more passionate, is more vociferous in the way that they look at the game and the way that they react to the game. And yet when that happens to you because of something that you said, you use it and you use it and arm it against an entire fan base because somebody is actually being critical of you. Somebody is actually being passionate about what they feel. You just might not agree with it. So again, I just don't see. I will acknowledge that it might be different in the way that they go about it at different times. But ultimately, if it's just about criticism, in this case, you're bringing up criticism and you're equating criticism with a more passionate type of culture or fan base when it comes to the game. And yet when it happens to you, you use it to say, oh, look at this American soccer culture. They can't handle criticism. Well, actually, they're responding to criticism with more criticism.
Is that a response to criticism with like legitimate criticism? Just calling something toxic or labeling names in regards to that?
I mean, hold on. We see this all over the world where it's players, coaches, front office, fans that respond to criticism and they're screaming and yelling and going back and forth. So I don't think that, this water off the back of a duck happens around the world by any stretch of the imagination. Look at Jose Mourinho. All right. Jose Mourinho, he screams and yells at people when it gets criticized. So, but when Greg Berhalter says it, that's not okay.
Wait. But who said that I have an issue with Greg Berhalter saying it? That's not what I said.
You just said that Greg Berhalter pushing back against what he feels is a toxic reaction from somebody. You're using it to illustrate the lack of fandom or the different way in fandom operates in the United States.
But don't you think that if I go and I just say Greg Berhalter is shit and I don't elaborate on anything, is that a fair criticism? I mean, I can say whatever I want, of course. You can say whatever you want. But you labeling something toxic, you got to point out what it is. Every criticism that was made to Greg, whether it was right or whether it was wrong, right? Because again, no one here is to say maybe he did a great job, maybe he didn't do a good job. Some criticism was fair, some was over-exaggerated, over the top. But everything had something to back it, a point. Again, whether it was right or it was wrong. Now, just saying that a fan base being outspoken and unhappy because the team won the way they won, that is not elaborating a point. That's just calling someone something. It's like me going, Alexi, you're stupid. And you're like, why? What did I say? It was like, I got to mention, like, at least, like, why am I saying that?
Stop it. Stop it. You think that the Argentinian fan base or your Brazilian fan base, you think they always come with a TED talk and a Excel sheet pinpointing every
Oh, no.
single reason as to
No, no,
why
no, no,
they
no,
don't
no,
like
no.
somebody? So,
But the
so
media
what are you
ignores
saying?
that. It's just part of the culture. That was my point. It's part of the culture. So
We
it's
don't
just seen
ignore
as
it. It's on
something
the front
normal.
page. What are you talking about?
Guys,
Wait,
hold
what is
on
on the
one
front
second.
page?
Hold on one second. Let's jump back into the original point though about MLS. We're talking about media, fandom, you know,
But it was
passion.
fun. It was a fun discussion.
No, it was. But let's get back onto the topic at hand of MLS being top 10. I don't necessarily agree that the fandom of passion makes the league better, but it can make it more beautiful. It can make it more thrilling. But I don't necessarily agree that that's what makes the quality go up. And I agree with you, Filippo. Criticism can be warranted. You should be able to say whatever you want. And I know that MLS is a little soft when it comes to some criticism they don't like to hear. You put the league down, or they'll alienate you. Some teams have alienated some fans because they have been hypercritical of the team. But let's get back to one point you made about the Champions League. Okay, Mexico more specifically. You said that MLS has only won 3 times in the last 30 years. And that is one of their biggest shortcomings of why they aren't considered top 10, because they're not even the best in their region, right? But I just think that you have to take that year by year, because the Premier League, how many years has it been since the Premier League has won the UEFA Champions League?
Well, just to add to that, in CONCACAF, MLS and Liga MX are by far the best 2 leagues, right? Kind of like how in South America, you do have leagues that occasionally win it, but it's mostly dominated by Argentine and Brazilian clubs. While in Europe, we can go through 5, and also in Europe, like Alexi mentioned, Bayern, for example. Bayern is as good as any top English team, right? So is PSG, maybe, even though they never won. Real Madrid and Barcelona. So that, I think that's where it's a bit different. And then it goes back to, even I'm going to use what Alexi said. It's different, and you have to go you can't really compare the regions sometimes in that sense. But if you want something to play in MLS's favor, the record has gone up quite a bit. I even pulled up before, like, we have the record here from 97 to 2008 in knockout rounds. MLS was 3 times knocked out. Sorry, 3 times they advanced, 10 they got knocked out. Then when you go from 2008 to 2016, it was 2 times they advanced, 18 that they were knocked out. So it got worse. But then if you go from 2018 to 2024, which I would argue that's where MLS made a bigger jump in terms of quality, there was growth on the Beckham era and all that, but this was where it actually improved in quality. The record right now is MLS advanced 14 times, which is way more than they've ever done, and they lost 25. There's still a gap, but it's definitely closer than it has been recently.
But if you're in the world of soccer and you guys are, you're knee deep in it, what's the quickest, fastest way to be successful? To spend money, right? You spend money, okay? And certainly that has been done at a much higher rate when you compare and contrast with MLS, because when you talk about spending money, you can take the top 2-3 teams and they can spend a tremendous amount, and that can translate into results not only within the league, but in these intra-league type of situations. But when it comes to MLS, again, because of the structure, you're not just talking about the 2 or 3 teams. You're talking about everybody spending more money. And that moves at a much slower rate. And MLS, maybe to your point, if MLS, all they cared about was winning and being the best team and having the best team in CONCACAF, then they would put all of their money and just 2 or 3 teams, and we'd have that type of situation that exists around the world. Now, those teams would be incredible. They'd run the table when it came to the league, but then they would compete and would win in a much more balanced way when it comes to games against Liga MX and tournaments against Liga MX.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
But as far as MLS trying to be better than top 10, they're trying to be top 5. And we've heard Don Garber say this many times. That I think originally his goal was to be top 6 by 2022, which has came and passed. And that's clearly not going to happen for a multitude of reasons. But when you're talking about being a top league in the world, Filippo, you can't be focusing on Liga MX because they're small. They're a small fish in the big pond. Like they're not, or they're the big fish in the small pond in the CONCACAF. But in talking about the grand scheme of things, they're very small. You should be trying to chase the top 5 leagues, the Brazilian league. Is MLS hurting themselves by chasing Liga MX trying to just beat them instead of trying to be better than them?
It's a very interesting topic when we talk about like top 5, top 10 leagues. I don't really care what ranking MLS is at the end of the day. It doesn't matter too much. I think what MLS is hurting itself is chasing any of these leagues, as weird as this sounds. The thing that's going to attract mainly, and again, I'm not doing what Stu Holden did when he was at Alexi's podcast, talking about bringing back Pulisic and McKennie. And that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is MLS will get more attention of the American market if they have more American players and if the quality is good enough to keep that level in the national team, like still be successful. Possibly something we saw in like 2002, for example, right? An MLS, mostly MLS, pretty much almost all players in MLS in 2000, almost all.
Oh, a lot. I mean, a lot.
Yeah,
Certainly,
the majority, the vast majority of the roster, maybe I'm forgetting one or two, but most of them were, and they made it to a quarterfinals. A successful American team in MLS with American players would do well. Now, just bringing Pulisic back, we've seen them do that 2014, 2015, whenever, when they started bringing Clint back and Howard and Michael Bradley and Josie.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think that actually instigated a little bit of the excessive hatred you see for the league these days, because a lot of people blamed MLS for us failing to not qualify to the World Cup, whether that's fair or not. What MLS had to be focusing on is the culture within, like probably the youngest athletes, how to get them to get involved with soccer and improve youth development here, get more better players, American players. That's what's going to get the American market. And even Alexi, you had him as a guest too. And I told this to Will, you had Tom Byer on, for example, as a guest. And I know you're going to talk about, I might be getting ahead of myself here. You're going to talk about youth structure at some point, right, Will?
Yeah. Well, I think I might save that for the USMNT video, honestly.
Okay. Do you want me to mention real quick what I want to say
Go
about
ahead.
it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. What I was going to say is, like, for example, I don't think MLS does a bad job with the academies they have. The problem is there has to be some type of way for MLS to recognize that they don't have the advantages that a South American country has, where a kid is just kicking a soccer ball at his dad when he's 2 or 3 or 4. So he's getting those early stage developments outside of like organized soccer. We don't have this in the US, or we don't have that culture. It's a bit different here. Again, there's no issue with that. But MLS, their academies are fine. They have to know how to bridge that gaps. Like, we don't have this here, like these countries do. How do we adjust that? If you can adjust that and you start to develop some incredible players, people will watch more of MLS if the Americans are here. If the league was good enough to sustain Pulisic at a high level, I can assure you pretty much every U.S. men's national team fan would be watching that team. But right now, if you bring him back, there's going to be heavy criticism. We have to raise the floor and the level of the American player, which arguably it is going up, but they have to find that gap. And Tom Byer talked about it in your podcast too, talked about here on mine. It's something that would take probably a decade or two, and there's no like magic bullet. Like, MLS can't just like go and just like flick a wand and it randomly fixes everything. But these are issues they have to address if they want to win this market. I think they should focus not on Liga MX, not in Brazil, not in Europe, but how do they win the American audience? And it's not through marketing gimmicks. They can do it by getting the good American players. That's what I think they should do. I am speaking this out of my own experience with USMNT fans and myself, speaking on my behalf. And I think most US national team fans would agree with this.
I don't know that the American player moves the needle enough. MLS's problem isn't that there aren't soccer fans in the US, and you guys know this. MLS's problem is there not enough MLS fans. And the competition that exists for the hearts and minds of soccer fans that exist in the United States, it is fierce. And it is unique because of the compare and contrast that happens, and the built-in biases and baggage that we all have, and the insecurity and the inferiority complex and all that kind of stuff. So if you brought back, to Stu's point, or even a little bit what you were talking about, American players, I do think that would resonate and people would get excited. It doesn't change it. I think I agree with you in that. The ranking of MLS, where it is in your heart, or up on a power rankings type of thing, whatever. I want Don Garber to live up to his vision of having Major League Soccer be a league of choice for domestic players, that they don't want to go anywhere else. They want to stay here and play because they're going to make a bunch of money. They're going to be famous if that's what they want. They're going to get, most importantly, the competitive level that doesn't hurt them in terms of the perception around the world or their perception of their national team coach. And I want it to be American in its most American sense, in that we expect the best. And right now, Major League Soccer is not even close to the best in the world. It can be. It's not for lack of money. There are billionaires all over the place when it comes to Major League Soccer. So I want to see a MLS on steroids. And it's easy for us to tell people how to spend their money and what to do with it. We do a great job of that. But I would love to see what MLS would look like without the restrictions, without the restraints, if they just went full bore. It's not Saudi Arabia. It's not China. It has a unique aspect and asset and value to it, in that people want to come here. The migration that happened to England didn't happen because of food and weather. It happened because of money. People want to come here, and if they can make good money and their credibility doesn't suffer, you can have the #1 league in the world.
But
Alexi,
then no one's going to want to go to Ohio, though.
Let me follow up with this though real quick, because we're going to wrap this up, but I want to ask both of you this final question about Apple TV though, because this has been another thing that has been highly debated, if that is going to prevent the league from reaching its potential. Filippo, obviously you and I have talked about this numerous times about the paywall, hiding casual fans. You tell me about your dad watching an Orlando City game. If it's on TV casually, he hasn't watched the game in what, 3-4 years, because there's just not a place to watch it.
People know what that story is. So I grew up in New York, right? But my parents, when I was in college, they moved to Orlando. And then when I graduated, I came to Central Florida too. And I remember one thing me and my dad would do every weekend, whether Orlando was playing home or away, whenever we didn't go to the game, we went a lot of the games when Kaká was around. And then a few with Nani in the new stadium later on. Kaká even was still here when the new stadium came on. It was Exploria, now it's Interco. And we would go to the games and watch, because it was on open TV here. So it was on. My dad loves soccer. We would put on, we would watch the game. I wouldn't call him an Orlando City fan or passion, but he liked watching Orlando City games. But he was very much casual, right? He would watch the game, didn't care much about after that, but he would watch it. With Apple, yes, he didn't feel like signing up, and he hasn't watched since. He's not the diehard type. He never would become one. I don't think they would ever convert him. But he was a regular viewer. That I know for a fact. Now that's one person, right? I don't know at a larger
How many
scale.
of those are there though? How many people?
I don't know. I don't know.
Alexi
I'm just
said,
giving you my story. I don't know, but probably a few. Yeah,
a lot,
probably
a lot, honestly. And like
It's okay
Alexi
though,
said,
but it's okay. It's okay if it's anecdotal. I mean, this is a soccer fan. This is the soccer fan that I'm talking about. And I think I agree with you guys that, it's been out of sight, out of mind. And that's not a good thing for MLS in particular. It's one thing if you're the NFL, everybody's going to migrate and figure it out if it's the NFL. But this is MLS. And if you're going to make it difficult for people like your father or anybody else out there who in the past might have been flicking through and seen it, or it was just easier for them to get it, that's a problem going forward. So it remains to be seen. I know it's a lot of money, but the short term and the long term types of impact and aspect of it. And look, they do a great job over there at Apple. I know a lot of the people over there, but again, what it was in terms of its visibility, and therefore the acknowledgement and the credibility, and what it is now, are very, very different things that you just laid out. So I don't think it's just your father.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I'm just giving my story there. That is not a diehard that they lost, but they lost the guy. He was watching every weekend. I know, because he's a Brazilian dad. They put any soccer game on, they watch. And he's in Orlando, and he went to a few Kaká games. He has a bunch of Orlando City jerseys. You would think he's a diehard, but he's not. And he doesn't really watch anymore. He follows like what's going on. He knows the results, but doesn't. He also doesn't have an iPhone. He doesn't have anything Apple. So once he saw Apple, he's like, that's another thing too, right? Apple is huge. Obviously, a lot of people have iPhones, but some people never had an Apple product. So when you tell them that it's on Apple, they don't even want to think about it. Like, man, I don't want to have it. They don't even think that you don't need an Apple device to watch it. So I would say for a league, and you mentioned it, like NFL, they don't need exposure, right? They're the biggest sporting league in the United States and the richest in the world. MLS is a league that, from my understanding, their main goal right now is growth. They need to grow, keep growing. They haven't peaked. So if you're going to put yourself behind a paywall and make it more difficult, it doesn't really help. It misses the purpose, right? But yeah, it is $250 million a year. So there's that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Now, we've seen MLS obviously put a little bit more effort into marketing it. I've seen it a little bit more this year. They got the Sunday night soccer. We'll see what happens. But one thing that all three of us can agree on is that there are a lot of soccer fans in this country The potential is off the charts. MLS could be one of the best leagues in the world. I mean, top 5 one day. The question is, how long will it take? We will see.
Will, before you go, because I actually wanted to get both of your takes on this. Can I give one? One more?
Yeah, of course.
You have time? I talked about the MLS regular season and how, to me, it doesn't, I don't like it very much. There are moments where it just doesn't really matter. And I think that does hurt MLS. Why doesn't MLS ever consider maybe switching to something like, for example, what Mexico does? I'm not saying to copy Mexico, but I think we can copy things that work, right? Having an abertura and clausura and then like a MLS Cup final, right? You know what I mean, right? By Liga MX, they have the apertura and the clausura. So it's essentially 2 different leagues, and you get they won the apertura, won the clausura. But instead of doing what they do, we have the winner of one, winner of the other, MLS Cup. And if you win both, then you're the champion. You won both, right? You're clearly the best team. That way you get 2 playoff rounds in a year, right? Which is what people watch the most. And the regular season has less games. So each game is worth more. That's one thing that I thought they should consider. The regular season's too long, and it reached the point where people tune out.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple of things. Less games is less money. In the way that MLS owners look at it, especially MLS owners that own stadiums.
Same amount of games, Alexi, from what I said, just broken down 2 separate seasons in the same year.
I thought you said less. I thought you said less games.
No. I meant less games. So the abertura is like half. So it's essentially the champion of half season, champion of the second half. But it's the same amount.
Years ago when I worked in the front offices, I actually sent a proposal that had that a long time ago. And look, they have looked at all of these different things. And MLS, as we know, is a work in progress. Each and every year there are different rules and guidelines that show up, and there's changes that happen. It's 30 years old, but it's still only 30 years old, and so it's trying different things. We've heard of a possibility of a season switch in terms of going to the European calendar and all that kind of stuff. So it is going to change no matter what, both on and off the field going forward. And at some point they're going to get it right. And maybe it involves stuff that we suggest, and maybe it involves somebody much smarter than us coming up with something either different or using, like you said, what goes on in another country or culture and adopting it and maybe making it even better.
No, I agree. It's MLS is a guinea pig. Like you said, it's 30 years old. They've changed several things last 5 years, 10 years. They're constantly changing things. The calendar change, I think, could be interesting because we will see teams do their primary business in the same window as other teams. It's really hard to get someone's best player or one of their best players in the middle of their season. It's really hard to convince people to do that. But listen, I appreciate both of you coming on. Let us know in the comment section if you agree that MLS is a top 10 league, if you think it's not. Also, make sure you give Filippo a view and a check his channel out at Tactical Manager TV. Follow him on Twitter. Also, check out Alexi's podcast, State of the Union, Alexi Lalas' State of the Union podcast, and also give him a follow on Twitter. I appreciate both of you joining me today. Hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. Until next time, guys, I will see you all soon.